I wasn't supposed to be home that morning. I'd left in a rush, as always, juggling coffee, briefcase, and the mounting pressures of my day job. But somewhere halfway to the office, I realized I'd forgotten my keys on the kitchen counter. Cursing under my breath, I made a quick U-turn, intending to dash in, grab them, and head out without even taking off my shoes. As I stepped inside the house, something felt off. The air was thick, almost as if it carried secrets I wasn't meant to uncover. I froze mid-step at the sound of my wife, Emily, talking in the kitchen. Her voice, usually honeyed and warm, was sharp and conspiratorial. I leaned against the wall, my pulse quickening, ears straining to catch her words. "My husband is such an idiot," she sneered. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, disbelief rushing through my veins. "If your detectives don't find anything compromising on him, then we'll end up with nothing." I stood there, rooted in place, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. Detectives? Compromising evidence? What was this, a thriller movie? But it wasn't a movie, it was my life, and the star villain was my wife. My breath caught in my throat as I processed the scene. Emily was scheming against me with someone else. I couldn't hear the other voice clearly, but it was there, a low, smug murmur that made my blood boil. I didn't need to know who it belonged to, the fact that it wasn't me was enough. My fists clenched instinctively, anger bubbling up inside me like a volcano about to erupt. But then, a thought stopped me. Reacting now would only give her the upper hand. No, I needed a plan, something calculated, something that would give me control of this spiraling situation. Quietly, I backed out of the house and returned to my car, my heart pounding like a war drum. I sat behind the wheel, gripping it tightly as I stared blankly out the windshield. Every part of me wanted to storm back in there, demand answers, yell, break things, anything to release the storm raging inside me. But instead, I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I never thought I'd need, my lawyer. "Mark, I need your help," I said, my voice tight with restrained fury. "This is about Emily. And it's serious." As I explained what I'd overheard, Mark didn't mince words. "We'll start immediately," he said firmly. "You're not alone in this. Let's handle it the smart way." The smart way. I repeated the phrase in my head like a mantra as I drove away from the house, my keys still sitting on the counter. The life I thought I had, the wife I thought I knew, was unraveling faster than I could comprehend. And I wasn't about to let her walk away from it unscathed. Driving away from the house, my mind raced. Each memory of Emily now felt like a puzzle piece I needed to re-examine. That laugh she always used to brush off my questions about her late-night outings, had it been fake? The sudden rush to get off the phone when I walked into the room, was that her lover on the line? I felt like a fool, blindsided in a marriage I thought was solid. But this wasn't the time for self-pity. Emily had crossed a line, and she'd chosen to do it in the most underhanded way possible. She was plotting against me, banking on me being too naive to notice. That was her mistake. Mark called me back within the hour. "This could get messy," he warned. "But we can stay ahead of her. I'll need details, financial documents, anything you can provide." "I'll get them," I promised. And I meant it. Emily might think she had me pegged, but she didn't know the side of me that could play dirty when pushed. I would do whatever it took to protect myself, to expose her for the person she really was. That evening, I returned home like nothing had happened. Emily greeted me at the door with her usual practiced smile. If I hadn't overheard her betrayal earlier, I might have believed her act. But now, her sweetness felt like venom disguised as honey. "Hey, babe. Long day," she chirped, leaning in for a kiss. Her lips barely brushed mine before she pulled away, already walking toward the living room. "Yeah," I muttered, forcing a casual tone. "Non-stop meetings. You?" "Oh, Just errands and house stuff, she said, waving a hand as if her day had been mundane. But I noticed her phone in her other hand, clenched tightly. Her grip on it was white-knuckled, like she was afraid I'd reach for it. I played along, sinking into the couch beside her and asking about dinner. She rambled on about some recipe she'd tried, but her words washed over me. My mind was on the phone. If she was hiding something, it would be in there. And I had every intention of finding it. Later that night, while Emily slept soundly beside me, I made my move. Her phone was on the nightstand, charging. I slipped out of bed as quietly as possible, the floor creaking under my weight. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed her phone and tiptoed out of the bedroom. In the kitchen, I unlocked it with ease. She'd never bothered to change the passcode, still assuming I was too trusting to snoop. The moment the screen lit up, my suspicions were confirmed. Text after text filled the screen, all to a contact labeled Jake. They weren't exactly subtle. Jake, miss you, babe. Can't wait for Friday. Emily, same here. Can't stand another night with him. Another night with him. Me. She was referring to me like I was a chore to endure. The words hit like a punch to the gut. But I kept scrolling, forcing myself to read every sordid detail of their conversations. She complained about my habits, my work hours, even the way I folded laundry. And Jake? He lapped it up, egging her on with compliments and promises of a better life. But the worst was yet to come. One thread stood out, a series of messages about hiring a private investigator. Emily was paranoid I might be hiding assets, something she could use against me if she decided to leave. She didn't just want to betray me, she wanted to ruin me. My hand shook as I set the phone down. Every ounce of trust I'd ever placed in her had been obliterated in those messages. The woman I'd married, the woman I thought I'd build a life with, was nothing more than a liar with a pretty face. The next morning, I didn't mention the phone. Instead, I acted as if everything was normal. Emily seemed none the wiser, laughing and chatting like nothing was wrong. But I noticed the little things now, the way her phone was never out of reach, the way she hesitated before answering my questions about her plans. Every detail felt like another crack in the mask she wore. I called Mark again that afternoon, filling him in on what I'd found. "We have what we need to move forward," he said confidently. "But you need to stay calm. Don't tip her off." Calm wasn't exactly my strong suit at the moment, but I knew he was right. If Emily thought I was onto her, she'd double down on whatever plan she was hatching. I had to stay one step ahead. That evening, Emily announced she was going out with friends. "Girls' night," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't wait up." I nodded, feigning disinterest. "Have fun," I said, watching her grab her purse and practically sprint out the door. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my own keys and followed. She didn't go to a bar. She didn't go to a friend's house. Instead, she drove to a dingy motel on the edge of town, parking her car in the back lot. I sat in my car, watching as she got out and was greeted by a tall man with a cocky smirk, "Jake." My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. I'd seen enough. My wife was more than just unfaithful, she was a schemer, a liar, and a manipulator. And now, I had the evidence to prove it. As I drove away, my mind was already racing with plans. Emily thought she had me cornered, but she was wrong. The game had changed, and I wasn't playing to lose. The motel encounter was the final nail in the coffin. Watching Emily and Jake embrace, their body language screaming familiarity, I knew there was no salvaging this marriage. But I wasn't content with just walking away. Emily's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was calculated, ruthless. She thought she was outsmarting me, but she was about to learn the hard way that I wasn't the fool she believed I was. Driving home, my mind churned with plans. Emily was expecting me to roll over, to be the passive, clueless husband she could walk all over. I was done playing that role. I spent the night drafting a list, every step I needed to take, every loose end I had to tie up. Revenge wasn't just about satisfaction, it was about control, about ensuring she couldn't destroy me in the process. The next morning, Emily acted as though nothing had happened. She hummed a tune in the kitchen, frying eggs and pouring coffee like the perfect wife. Her nonchalance was almost impressive. If I didn't know better, I might have believed her act. But now, her every move felt like an insult. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, setting a plate of eggs in front of me. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I couldn't let her see even a flicker of the anger burning inside me. "Busy day today?" "Not really," she said with a shrug, sipping her coffee. "Might head to the gym, maybe do some shopping." Her lies slid out so easily, so effortlessly. I nodded, pretending to focus on my breakfast while mentally preparing for the day ahead. My lawyer, Mark, had already set the wheels in motion. Bank accounts were being scrutinized, documents were being prepared, and every shred of evidence against Emily was being compiled. But there was one more thing I needed to do, something that would ensure her downfall. Later that afternoon, I called an old friend, Mike, who worked in private security. Mike and I had gone through college together, and he'd built a career on surveillance and investigation. If anyone could help me uncover the full extent of Emily's deceit, it was him. "Mike," I said when he picked up, "I need a favor. And it's a big one." I explained the situation, leaving nothing out. The phone conversation was tense, punctuated by Mike's low whistles of disbelief. "Man, that's brutal," he said finally. "But you came to the right guy. I'll get my team on it. Give me a couple of days." "Thanks, Mike," I said, relief flooding through me. "I owe you." "No, you don't. Just promise me you won't do anything stupid." I chuckled darkly. "No promises." While Mike worked his magic, I started planting seeds of doubt in Emily's world. It was subtle at first, a casual mention of how work was going well, how I might be in line for a big promotion. I knew she'd latch onto the idea, that her scheming mind would immediately start calculating how she could benefit from my supposed success. The more I fed her this narrative, the more I saw her guard drop. She even started being overly affectionate, probably trying to secure her position as the supportive wife. It was almost laughable, watching her try to play the role of a doting partner while sneaking off to her lover behind my back. But I let her believe she was winning, that her little game was going unnoticed. 2 days later, Mike called with an update. "You were right," he said grimly. "Your wife's been busy. The guy she's seeing, Jake, isn't just her lover. He's her partner in crime." "What do you mean?" I asked, the knot in my stomach tightening. "They're plotting to bleed you dry. She's been moving money into an account under Jake's name, and they're planning to skip town once she gets what she wants." I sat in stunned silence, gripping the phone so hard it creaked. Emily wasn't just cheating, she was actively trying to ruin me. It was one thing to betray me emotionally, but financially? That was war. "Send me everything you've got," I said finally. "Every transaction, every message. I want it all." "Already done," Mike said. "Check your email. And hey, man, be careful. People like this don't play fair." I thanked him and hung up, opening the email on my laptop. As I scrolled through the evidence, my anger boiled over. Screenshots of bank transfers, photos of Emily and Jake meeting at discrete locations, and even audio recordings of their conversations, it was all there, a damning dossier that painted a clear picture of their betrayal. That night, I made my move. While Emily was out, undoubtedly meeting Jake, I called Mark and laid out the plan. "We're filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. "And I want to hit her where it hurts. Freeze the accounts, file an injunction, whatever it takes to stop her from taking another cent. Mark agreed without hesitation, his tone matching my resolve. Consider it done. We'll serve her the papers tomorrow. By the time Emily returned home, I was sitting in the living room, waiting. She walked in with a cheery, "Hey, babe," but froze when she saw the look on my face. "We need to talk," I said coldly. Her smile faltered, confusion and panic flashing across her features. "What's wrong?" I stood, holding up a stack of papers. "Everything, Emily. Everything is wrong." As I watched the color drain from her face, I felt the faintest flicker of satisfaction. The game was over, and it was my turn to play. Emily stared at the stack of papers in my hand as if they were a venomous snake. Her wide eyes darted between my face and the documents, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. What is this?" she stammered, her voice trembling. I set the papers on the coffee table with a deliberate motion, keeping my gaze locked on hers. "This, Emily, is proof. Proof of every lie you've told, every scheme you've plotted. Proof of what you've become." Her jaw tightened, her expression shifting from confusion to defiance. "What are you talking about? You're not making any sense." I leaned forward, my voice low and controlled. "I'm talking about Jake. About the money you've been siphoning into his account. About the private investigator you hired to dig into my life, hoping to find dirt on me. I know everything, Emily. Every single thing." Her face turned a ghostly shade of pale. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, but then her lips curled into a sneer. "So what? You've been so wrapped up in your work, you didn't even notice. Do you have any idea what it's like to be married to someone who barely pays attention to you?" There it was, her attempt to deflect, to make this about me. I didn't let her off the hook. "Don't even try that," I snapped, my voice rising. "This isn't about me being busy. This is about you betraying me, lying to my face every day while you plan to destroy me behind my back. You don't get to play the victim here." She crossed her arms, her chin jutting out stubbornly. "Maybe if you weren't such a boring, predictable husband, I wouldn't have needed to find excitement elsewhere." Her words were like a slap, but I refused to let them see me flinch. Instead, I stood up, towering over her as I pointed to the papers. "Excitement? This isn't about excitement, Emily. This is about greed. You weren't just unfaithful, you were calculating, cold, and vicious. You tried to ruin me, and for what? So you could run off with some loser who doesn't even have the decency to keep his nose out of another man's marriage?" She glared at me, her bravado slipping. "You don't understand." "Stop," I cut her off. "I don't want to hear your excuses. This is over. Do you hear me? Over." Her mouth opened and closed, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, she hissed, "You think you're so smart, don't you? Like you're the hero in all of this. Newsflash, Dan, you're just as pathetic as you think I am." I took a step back, shaking my head. "The difference is, I'm not the one who broke my vows. I'm not the one who tore this marriage apart." The rest of the night passed in tense silence. Emily retreated to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her, while I stayed in the living room, my mind racing. The confrontation had been satisfying in a way, but it also left me feeling hollow. This was the woman I had loved, trusted, and shared my life with. And now? Now she was just a stranger wearing Emily's face. But there was no time to dwell on the emotions. The wheels were already in motion, and there was no turning back. The divorce papers would be served the next morning, and Mark had assured me that Emily wouldn't be able to touch another dime of our joint finances. I spent the rest of the night gathering any remaining evidence I could find. Emails, receipts, anything that painted a clear picture of Emily's deceit. By the time I finished, the first rays of dawn were creeping through the windows, and exhaustion weighed heavy on me. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not until this nightmare was behind me. When the knock came at the door later that day, I was ready. Emily had spent the morning sulking, barely acknowledging me as she drank her coffee in stony silence. But when she opened the door to find a process server standing there with an envelope in hand, her composure crumbled. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, ripping the envelope open. "It's exactly what you think it is," I said from the couch, not bothering to look up. "Divorce papers." Her shriek of anger echoed through the house. "You're divorcing me? After everything I've put up with, you have the audacity to do this to me?" I stood up, turning to face her with a cold, unflinching stare. "This isn't something I'm doing to you, Emily. It's something you did to yourself. Actions have consequences, and now you get to face them." She threw the papers at me, her face twisted in fury. "You're going to regret this, Dan. You'll regret ever messing with me." I smirked, crossing my arms. "I'm sure Jake will be a great comfort to you when you're living off his paycheck." Her eyes blazed with hatred, but she didn't say another word. Instead, she stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. For a moment, I stood there, staring at the closed door. Then, slowly, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. As the hours passed, the silence in the house grew deafening. But for the first time, it wasn't the kind of silence that made me feel small or insignificant. It was the kind of silence that came with clarity, with freedom. Emily was gone, and while the path ahead was uncertain, it was mine to walk. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was in control of my life. I wasn't a fool. Emily might try to retaliate, to make things even messier. But I was ready. She had underestimated me once, and that had been her fatal mistake. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about reclaiming my dignity, my peace, and my future. The house felt eerily quiet in the hours after Emily stormed out. For years, this home had been a place of shared memories, some good, some bad, but now it felt like a battleground. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee that had gone cold, staring blankly at the papers she'd thrown back at me. Her threats echoed in my mind. "You'll regret messing with me." If this was her version of regret, I'd hate to see what victory looked like. The next morning, Mark called with an update. "Dan, we've got everything locked down. Joint accounts are frozen, and I've filed for a restraining order to prevent her from making any large withdrawals." "Good," I said, though a part of me bristled at how messy this had all become. "What about the house?" "She doesn't have a leg to stand on," Mark assured me. "We'll argue it's your primary residence, and given her actions, I don't see a judge siding with her." Hearing that gave me some relief, but it was fleeting. Emily wasn't the type to slink away quietly. She'd made that much clear. By the afternoon, the fallout had begun in earnest. Emily's family started calling, her sister, her mother, even her cousin who lived out of state. I ignored most of them, but when her mother left a voicemail accusing me of ruining her daughter's life, I felt my blood boil. Ruined her life? If only they knew the truth. Finally, I decided to call back her sister, Lisa. Unlike the rest of Emily's family, Lisa had always seemed grounded and reasonable. If anyone could be made to see reason, it was her. "Dan," Lisa said when she picked up, her voice cautious. "I was hoping you'd call back. If you're calling to defend Emily." "I'm not," she interrupted. I want to know what's going on. She's been calling everyone, saying you blindsided her with divorce papers. That you're trying to take everything from her." I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course she's playing the victim. Did she also mention she's been cheating on me? That she's been siphoning money into an account for her boyfriend and planning to leave me broke?" There was a long pause. "Cheating?" Lisa finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Cheating, stealing, lying, you name it, I said. I have the evidence to prove it, Lisa. I wouldn't have filed for divorce if this was just about a bad argument. Lisa sighed, and I could hear the tension in her voice. I knew she wasn't happy, but I didn't think she'd go this far. Well, she did, I said bluntly. And now she has to deal with the consequences. Lisa didn't argue, and for that, I was grateful. She promised to speak to her mother and at least try to calm the family down. It was a small victory, but I'd take it. Meanwhile, Emily was busy trying to salvage her own narrative. Over the next few days, friends and acquaintances began reaching out, some curious, others outright hostile. It was clear Emily had been spinning her own version of events, painting herself as the poor, mistreated wife who had been blindsided by my paranoia. But for every sympathetic ear she found, I had the truth on my side. I didn't bother responding to most people, but when one particularly nosy mutual friend texted me asking if it was true that I'd been abusive, I sent back a single photo, a screenshot of Emily and Jake's incriminating messages. The response was instant. Oh my God. I had no idea. I'm so sorry, Dan. The tide was beginning to turn. That Friday, I finally confronted Jake. It wasn't planned. I'd gone to grab groceries and spotted him in the parking lot of a hardware store. He was standing by his car, looking every bit as smug as I'd imagined him to be. Something about his casual arrogance ignited a fire in me. I parked my car and walked straight toward him, my footsteps purposeful. He noticed me too late to escape. Jake, I said, my voice cold. He turned, feigning confusion. Do I know you? You know exactly who I am. My fists clenched at my sides, but I kept my composure. I'm the guy whose wife you've been sleeping with. The guy whose money you've been stealing. For a moment, he tried to play dumb. Look, man, I don't know what you're talking about. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. Save it. I've got the evidence. I've seen the texts, the bank transfers, all of it. So don't bother denying it. His cocky demeanor faltered, and he took a step back. Hey, I don't want any trouble. Too late for that, I said, stepping closer. You made this trouble the moment you decided to mess with my life. Jake mumbled something about leaving, but I wasn't done. Here's the deal, I said, my voice low and threatening. You stay away from me. You stay away from my money. And you stay the hell away from my life. If you don't, I'll make sure the authorities know about your little involvement in Emily's schemes. Do you understand me? He nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah. Got it. I walked away without another word, leaving him pale and shaken in the parking lot. That night, I sat alone in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand. The house was still, the silence no longer oppressive but peaceful. Emily had underestimated me, and now she was reaping the consequences of her betrayal. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to hope. The worst was behind me, and now it was time to start rebuilding, on my own terms. The encounter with Jake gave me a grim satisfaction, but it also left me with a deep sense of exhaustion. Confronting him was just one piece of the puzzle. Emily was still out there, spinning her web of lies, and I wasn't naive enough to think she'd give up without a fight. The next morning, Mark called again with an update. Dan, I've filed an official motion to freeze any accounts tied to her or her accomplice. We've got the documentation lined up for court, but I'll need you there to testify about what you've experienced. I'll be there, I said firmly. If Emily thought she could keep spinning her narrative in court, she was in for a rude awakening. That afternoon, Emily came back to the house. I heard her car in the driveway and the click of her heels as she stormed through the door. She was on the warpath, her face twisted in anger as she threw her bag onto the counter. We need to talk, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. About what? I asked coolly, not bothering to look up from my laptop. Don't play dumb, she spat. You've frozen my accounts, Dan. I can't even pay my phone bill. How am I supposed to survive? I set the laptop aside and stood, crossing my arms as I faced her. You're asking me how you're supposed to survive? After everything you've done? She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh, don't be so dramatic. You're acting like I killed someone. You didn't kill someone, Emily, I said, my voice rising. But you killed this marriage. You killed the trust, the love, everything that made us work. And now, you're reaping what you sowed. Her eyes narrowed, her voice dripping with venom. You think you're so righteous, don't you? Like you're the victim in all of this. You weren't perfect, Dan. You're boring, predictable, and so wrapped up in yourself that you didn't even see this coming. Her words stung, but I refused to let her see it. Instead, I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You're right, Emily. I didn't see this coming. Because I believed in you. I believed in us. And you took that belief and turned it into a weapon. For a moment, she faltered, her bravado cracking. But then she squared her shoulders, defiance hardening her expression. You're going to regret this, she said through gritted teeth. I promise you, Dan, you haven't seen the last of me. I'm counting on it, I said, my voice like ice. Because the more you fight, the worse it'll be for you. I've got the truth on my side, Emily. What do you have? Her face flushed with anger, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. But instead, she grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. The days that followed were a blur of meetings with Mark, court filings, and preparing for the legal battles ahead. Emily made good on her promise to make things difficult, filing her own motions and trying to twist the story in her favor. But she underestimated the strength of the evidence we had. Emails. Texts. Financial records. Mike's surveillance reports. Everything painted a damning picture of her betrayal and deceit. Mark was relentless, presenting our case with precision and confidence. Each time Emily's lawyer tried to poke holes in our argument, Mark shut them down with cold, hard facts. Watching Emily squirm in court was both painful and satisfying. Part of me still couldn't believe this was the same woman I'd once loved, the woman I'd imagined spending my life with. But every time I felt a pang of regret, I reminded myself of the lies, the schemes, the cold calculation behind her actions. Outside of court, Emily tried another tactic, playing the victim in the court of public opinion. Mutual friends began calling, texting, asking questions, and expressing their shock at how cruel I was being to her. But I refused to engage. I let the truth speak for itself, and as more people learned the full story, her support began to dwindle. Even Lisa, her sister, called me again to apologize. I don't know what's wrong with her, she said, her voice heavy with shame. She's not the person I thought she was. Neither was I admitted. But I'm done trying to figure her out. I just want this over with. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, I began to feel the weight lifting. The court proceedings wrapped up in my favor, Emily was denied any claim to the house or my assets, and Jake's involvement had landed him in legal trouble of his own. The day the divorce was finalized, I sat in my lawyer's office, staring at the papers that marked the end of a chapter one never imagined would end this way. How do you feel? Mark asked, sliding a pen across the table. I hesitated before picking it up, my hand hovering over the dotted line. Lighter, I said finally. Freer. Mark nodded. This is a new beginning, Dan. Use it well. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. For the first time in what felt like forever, the silence wasn't oppressive. It was peaceful. I wasn't consumed by anger, betrayal, or regret. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm. Emily had tried to destroy me, but she'd failed. And in the process, I'd rediscovered a part of myself I thought I'd lost, the part that could stand tall, face adversity, and come out stronger on the other side. I sipped my drink, letting the cool evening air wash over me. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. The divorce papers were signed, the courtroom battles were behind me, and Emily was officially out of my life. But the scars she left weren't so easily erased. For weeks after everything was finalized, I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, my mind replaying every argument, every lie, every smug look she gave when she thought she'd outsmarted me. But I wasn't going to let her haunt me forever. One morning, I stood in the living room and looked around. The house felt empty, not just because Emily was gone, but because it was a shell of what it used to be. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every corner of the space held memories, some good, but now mostly tainted. It was time to make a change. I started small. The first thing to go was the bedroom set. That mattress, those pillows, they'd witnessed too much. I replaced them with something new, something that was entirely mine. Next came the photos. Emily had loved covering the walls with framed pictures of us, but now those pictures felt like lies staring back at me. I boxed them up and shoved them in the attic, where they could collect dust until I decided what to do with them. From there, the changes became bigger. I repainted the walls, choosing bold, rich colors that felt like a reflection of who I wanted to be rather than the subdued tones Emily had preferred. I replaced the old furniture with pieces I'd picked out for myself, each one a declaration of independence. It wasn't just redecorating, it was reclaiming the space, making it mine again. As the house began to feel more like my own, I started to focus on my routine. Emily had been such a dominant force in my life that I'd let her needs and desires overshadow my own. Now, I had the freedom to rediscover what made me happy. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned, playing the guitar, going for long hikes, even trying my hand at cooking again. I'd always enjoyed experimenting in the kitchen, but Emily had been quick to criticize my messy style, so I'd stopped. Now, there was no one to critique my technique or roll their eyes when I burned something. And if I messed up, I could laugh about it and try again. One weekend, I decided to tackle something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for, a road trip. I packed a bag, filled the tank, and set off with no specific destination in mind. I drove through winding mountain roads, stopped at small diners for coffee and pie, and let the open road clear my mind. It wasn't a cure-all, but it helped. Each mile between me and my old life felt like a step toward healing. Emily, predictably, didn't disappear quietly. A month after the divorce, I got a text from her out of the blue. "Hey. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, a mixture of annoyance and curiosity bubbling up. Against my better judgment, I replied. "What do you want?" She called immediately, and against my instincts, I answered. "Dan," she began, her voice soft, almost pleading. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I made mistakes. Big ones." I said nothing, letting her words hang in the air. She continued. "I was hurt, okay? I didn't know how to deal with it, and I lashed out. But I want to make things right. Can we just talk? Maybe have dinner? Just to clear the air." I almost laughed. Dinner? Clear the air? After everything she'd done? But instead, I took a deep breath and responded with the calm she didn't deserve. "No, Emily. We don't need to talk. We don't need to have dinner. The air is clear on my end. You made your choices, and now we're both living with them." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "So that's it? You're just going to shut me out completely?" "Yes," I said simply. "That's it." I hung up before she could respond, then blocked her number. The chapter was closed, and I wasn't about to let her reopen it. As time passed, I found myself reflecting less on the betrayal and more on what I'd learned from it. Emily's actions had been cruel, but they'd forced me to reevaluate my life. I realized I'd spent so much time trying to please her, to meet her expectations, that I'd forgotten to ask myself what I truly wanted. One evening, I sat on the back porch with a journal, something I hadn't done since college. I began writing down the lessons I'd learned, the goals I wanted to pursue, and the person I wanted to become. It was cathartic, a way to process everything and channel it into something positive. I wrote about trust, how I'd given it freely, maybe too freely, and how I'd learned to value it more. I wrote about resilience, how I'd discovered a strength in myself I didn't know I had. And I wrote about freedom, the freedom to build a life that was truly mine, without compromise or deceit. Eventually, life settled into a new normal. The house, now completely transformed, felt like a sanctuary instead of a battlefield. My work, which I'd neglected during the chaos, became a source of pride again. And my social life, once entangled with Emily's friends and drama, began to flourish in new directions. I reconnected with old friends, joined a hiking club, and even went on a few dates. Nothing serious, but enough to remind me that not everyone was like Emily. One night, as I sat on the couch strumming my guitar, a thought struck me. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, they hadn't defined me. I'd taken control of my life and turned it into something better. And for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely happy. Months turned into a year, and the weight of everything I'd endured gradually faded into the background. The life I was building, step by step, felt like a triumph, a testament to the strength I didn't know I possessed. Emily's presence had become a distant memory, like a bad dream I'd finally woken up from. I hadn't heard from her since that last desperate phone call. According to Mark, she'd moved out of state, likely to start fresh with Jake or whatever new scheme she'd cooked up. Her absence was a gift, a clean slate I wasn't about to take for granted. One crisp autumn morning, I was in the middle of a hike, my boots crunching over fallen leaves, when my phone buzzed. It was Lisa, Emily's sister. Her name on the screen brought an unexpected wave of nostalgia, mixed with unease. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Lisa," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Dan," she replied, her voice warm but cautious. "I know it's been a while, but I wanted to check in. How have you been?" "I've been good," I said honestly. "Really good. How about you?" We exchanged small talk for a few minutes, the conversation surprisingly comfortable. But then Lisa sighed, and I knew there was something more. "Listen," she said, her voice soft. "I thought you should know, Emily and Jake are done. He ran out on her after draining her bank account. She's not doing well." I paused mid-step, the irony almost too perfect to believe. "I see," I said carefully. "And why are you telling me this?" "I'm not saying it to make you feel bad," Lisa said quickly. "I just thought you'd want to know. I know what she did was unforgivable, but she's still my sister. And, well, she's lost everything." I didn't feel bad, not in the way Lisa might have hoped. Instead, I felt a strange sense of vindication. Emily had set out to destroy me, but in the end, she'd only destroyed herself. "I appreciate you letting me know," I said finally. "But I've moved on, Lisa. I hope she finds her way, but her path and mine don't cross anymore." Lisa seemed to understand. "I figured as much. Take care, Dan." "You too," I said, ending the call. As I slipped the phone back into my pocket, I looked out at the trail ahead. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their golden leaves shimmering in the sunlight. It struck me how peaceful everything was, how much lighter I felt, knowing I was no longer tethered to Emily's chaos. That evening, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, reflecting on everything that had happened. The old version of me might have felt some lingering sadness for Emily, some misplaced responsibility to fix things or offer her forgiveness. But the man I'd become knew better. Her downfall wasn't my burden to carry. She'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. And mine had led me here, to a life that was finally mine to shape. Weeks later, as I was clearing out some old boxes, I stumbled across a photo album I hadn't seen since before the divorce. My first instinct was to toss it aside, but curiosity got the better of me. I flipped through the pages, each snapshot a reminder of a different time. There were pictures of our wedding, Emily's radiant smile lighting up the frame. Photos from vacations, holidays, and quiet moments at home. At first, I felt a pang of sadness, but then I realized something: those memories weren't just hers. They were mine too. And while the ending had been bitter, not every part of our time together was tainted. I closed the album and set it back in the box, a faint smile tugging at my lips. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something close: acceptance. Life continued to unfold in ways I hadn't anticipated. A few months later, I met someone, Rachel. She was nothing like Emily. She was grounded, honest, and unafraid to share her imperfections. We started slow, both cautious after our past experiences, but over time, something real began to grow between us. Rachel wasn't a savior or a replacement. She didn't come into my life to fix what was broken. Instead, she became a partner, someone who walked alongside me as I continued to rebuild myself. And for the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of hope for the future. One evening, as Rachel and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to me with a curious smile. "You never talk much about your past," she said gently. "I know it must have been hard." I took a deep breath, considering her words. It was, I admitted. But it taught me a lot. About myself. About what I want, and what I deserve. She nodded, her hand resting on mine. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you turned out pretty amazing." I chuckled, squeezing her hand. "Thanks, Rachel. That means more than you know." Looking back, I realized that Emily's betrayal, as painful as it had been, was the catalyst for a transformation I hadn't known I needed. It forced me to confront my own blind spots, to reclaim my identity, and to build a life rooted in authenticity and strength. If there was one thing I'd learned, it was this: life doesn't end with betrayal. It begins again. And sometimes, the hardest endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The past was behind me, the future stretched out ahead, and for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was meant to be.